Please be seated.
Mr. Tolimir and Mr. Gayesh, can you update us if the interpreters and the court reporter have now a hard copy each? I see you nodding, Mr. Gayesh. Thank you very much. But nevertheless, I would kindly remind you again to slow down while reading. It's not possible to follow in that speed. And it is, again, it's in your interest. If we lose sentences which are important, then it's not in your interest, and therefore you should really read slowly. Please continue, Mr. Tolimir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have left out one sentence from the previous paragraph, which says the exclusive reasons for Krivaja 95 are legal and legitimate. Republika Srpska had a right to attack the ABH in Srebrenica and Žepa enclaves pursuant to Article 60 of Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions, namely due to frequent, serious and fundamental violations of the Agreement on Demilitarization, which included extensive attacks from the enclaves. The VRS was relieved of its obligation to treat this area as a demilitarized zone and had the right to attack it. The reasons for the attack on Srebrenica and the aims of the attack are clearly stated in Exhibit P1202, which is an order for active combat operations issued by the then commander of the Drina Corps, General Živanović, which contains as the reason for acting combat operations as such, quote, "We estimate that in the forthcoming period the enemy is going to intensify its operations towards the area of responsibility of the Drina Corps and to intensify offensive operations focusing on the Tuzla, Zvornik and Kladanj, Vlasenička axis with the parallel and simultaneous engagement of the 28th Infantry Division from the enclave of Srebrenica and Žepa in order to cut off the area of responsibility of the Drina Corps and to link up the enclaves with the central territory of the former BH under the control of the Muslim forces. In recent days, particularly active are Muslim forces from Žepa and Srebrenica enclave. Sabotage and terrorist groups are being infiltrated who are attacking and torching villages, killing civilian population, and smaller units are being sent to the areas around the Žepa and Srebrenica enclave, particularly persistent in trying to link up the enclaves and creating this corridor. And then it goes on to say about the plans of the Muslims. There is an abundance of evidence which show that the linking up of the enclave with the central territory of the BH Federation was the main and the sole reason for the Operation Krivaja 1995. I make reference to P2369, a document produced on the 9th of November 1994 by Brigadier General Enver Hadži Hasanović from the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, addressed to the commander of the 8th OG Srebrenica, Nasser Orić, which details the plan for the implementation of this idea, which is defined in the following way, quote, by means of active combat operations, liberate the temporarily occupied territories of Bosnia and Herzegovina, namely Bratunac, Vlasenica, Šeković, Zvornik, and Kalesija municipalities, and link up free territories of Žepa and Srebrenica with the free territories of Zvornik, Kalesija, and Živinica, with a view of creating a permanent free corridor for delivering supplies to the population and logistical support of units of the BH Army, and creating a basis for further liberation of northeastern Bosnia as a whole. This plan was something that both the VRS and UNPROFOR knew about, because it is explained in that way in the final brief of the defense in paragraphs 414 to 419. The fact that the aim was to militarily defeat ABH in order to prevent the linking up of the enclaves with the central territory of BH is described by General Mladic in a conversation that he had with General Smith. Namely, in the statement that General Smith gave to the prosecution, and that is D193, page 9, General Smith speaks about the meeting that he had with General Mladic, at which General Mladic explained to him, I quote, that he was expecting an attack, a Bosnian attack from eastern enclaves, in which case he would attack the enclaves in order to destroy the ABH, but would be respecting, in doing so, his interpretation of the borders of the safe zone and not the interpretation of the UN. And then Smith concludes as follows. Finally, after this series of meetings, I reached the conclusions that the Bosnian Serbs have become aware that further fighting is unavoidable and that some sort of solution must be found during the year. The eastern enclaves were too strong, and the BH army deployed within these enclaves constituted a clear threat, particularly because the army of the Bosnian Serbs felt that there was a possibility for them to be faced by attacks on several fronts, unquote. Everything that was happening in and around the enclaves was the consequence exclusively of total unpreparedness on the part of UNPROFOR to implement the agreement on demilitarization reached in 1993 and the agreement on general cessation of hostilities admitted into evidence as P1011, in whose Article 6 the parties undertake to adhere to the agreement on demilitarization of Srebrenica's Žepa without delay and in full, the one that was concluded on the 24th of May 1993. Unfortunately, instead of general cessation of hostilities and demilitarization of the enclave, the ABH in Srebrenica and Žepa were arming themselves and reorganizing themselves in order to carry out the operation of linking up the enclaves with the central part of BH. In addition to representatives of the VRS, the ABH, and the Croats, the agreement was signed as witnesses, thereby guaranteeing its implementation. Representatives of UNPROFOR, namely General Michael.
Please stop and wait. the interpreters haven't finished the sentences you were reading before. You should, from time to time, look at the transcript and to see if it is still going on, and then you shouldn't start the next sentence. Please be very careful. The last words were, which are recorded, were representatives of UNPROFOR, namely General Michael, and then it stopped. Please continue.
Michael Rose
and Yasushi Akashi. This agreement was binding for UNPROFOR, including General Smith, General Nicolai, and the Dutch BAT. Instead of honoring the agreement on the general cessation of hostilities, Republika Srpska was under severe sanctions, whilst the army of Bosnia and Herzegovina, contrary to the arms embargo, was arming itself and reorganizing itself and carrying out offensive operations within the framework of the so-called Spring Offensive. Intensive sabotage and terrorist operations launched from the enclave are documented inter alia by following exhibits: D1, D16, D52, D53, D62, and D76. In Exhibit D238, which is an intelligence report dated 26 June 1995, on page 2 it is said, the Muslim forces, the 28th Division, on the night between the 25th and 26th June of this year, launched an offensive from the Srebrenica and Žepa enclave by infiltrating our territory with several sabotage and terrorist groups. They blocked UNPROFOR in Srebrenica under the pretext that they failed to protect the demilitarized zone. One should not rule out the possibility that some members of the UNPROFOR were disarmed. The aim of this operation was most probably to link up our forces and to create favorable conditions for the operations by the 24th and the 26th Division from the direction of Kalesia, Živinica, and Kladen. Even the prosecution witness, Momir Nikolic, stated in this courtroom, and it's recorded on transcript pages 12565 and 12566, and confirmed his statement given to the Dutch Institute for War Documentation. The number of the statement is D206, which reads, I quote, "The exodus from the enclave took the VRS by surprise. They had thought that Oric had gone to Tuzla and attempted to try and set up a corridor towards Srebrenica. Thereby, they would try to make a breakthrough to both territories. According to this scenario, the Second Corps would set off from Crni Vrh. By a corridor thus created, the Muslims would then cleanse the remaining territory towards the Drina and cleanse it of all Serbs. According to the information that the VRS had, this plan should have been implemented between the 20th and the 25th of July 1995. That is the reason why Oric and other officers left the enclave. The Muslim side did not make any particular effort to keep the plan about the corridor secret. Moreover, they even make made an announcement to this effect in order to create fear among the Serbian population. 20,000 Muslim forces were tasked with the cleansing of the other valley. While he was sitting at the same table with Amprofor, Oric reportedly claimed that he was the only one capable of organizing between 10 and 15,000 soldiers in the 28th Division. That was sufficient to take the reports about the forming of the corridor seriously. Even the inhabitants of the enclave were perhaps informed about the planned breakthrough. In the recent months, large quantities of ammunition reached the enclave, as well as doctors and medicines. In May and June 1995, the traffic between Žepa and Srebrenica considerably intensified.
Sastanak sa muslimanima
By following this kind of developments, the VRS asked for a meeting with the Muslims in Karaman's office. However, Karaman's failed to invite the Muslims. This was paragraph 41. These, as well as other pieces of evidence, clearly show why the Operation Krivaja was carried out. Although the prosecution does not cite any specific allegations and charges, in paragraph 889 of their final brief, they state that Tolimir contributed to the JCE by providing regular intelligence report about Srebrenica and Žepa in order to support the forthcoming attacks. First of all, providing intelligence information to the commander and other units and institutions was not something that was specifically conducted in the period between March and July 1995. Instead, Tolimir was doing that same thing throughout the whole war, and there are several hundred such reports admitted into evidence. By providing these reports, Tolimir carried out his duty of the assistant commander for intelligence and security. As time has shown, his reports were accurate, and if by doing so, and by knowing that the Muslims were preparing attacks in order to link up the territories of the enclave with the central part of the territory held by ABH, Tolimir did not contribute to any kind of joint criminal enterprise. This is merely the collection of information and intelligence about the enemy, i.e. the BH army, who throughout the whole period of the war was enjoying the protection of Amprofor and NATO, and which were used for joint operations of the ABH, the Croatian armed forces, and NATO rapid reaction forces, and a joint aggression against the Republika Srpska towards the end of the war.
The attack on Srebrenica was not an attack on the civilian population, nor did it have anything to do with causing harm to the civilian population. We had occasion to see a video, which is the Srebrenica video, indicating that on the 11th of July there was still population housing their apartments in the center of Srebrenica, and that there was provocation fire coming out directed at the VRS. And the fact that the target of this attack was not the civilian population was also demonstrated by what witness Kingori stated, namely that there were surprisingly few victims. He said as much on transcript page 5571. The Srebrenica proper was riddled with military targets, since private homes, housing developments, public buildings, the PTT building, as well as other buildings, were used for the purposes of armed formations, that's to say the BH Army. This is corroborated by the prosecution exhibit P957, which is a document dated 22nd February 1995, which contains information about the buildings used by the BH Army. Let me repeat the exhibit number. It's P957. Excellent, thank you. A number of documents speak to the fact that neither Operation Krivaja 95 nor the attack on Srebrenica were directed against the civilian population. Among these documents are the ones authored by Zdravko Tolimir. The way Tolimir went about the issue of the protection of UNPROFOR and the civilian population can be clearly found in several documents. Firstly, in Exhibit D85, a letter Tolimir sent to General Krstić on the 9th of July 1995, which reads, among others, special attention is to be given to the protection of UNPROFOR members and the civilian population. Exhibit D41 is another document that clearly indicates the approach taken toward the civilian population of Srebrenica. In the memo dated 9 July 1995, sent by Tolimir to the generals Gvero and Krstić, it is stated, and I quote, "Pursuant to the order of the President of Republika Srpska, issue an order to all combat formations participating in combat around Srebrenica to secure the highest possible protection and security for all members of UNPROFOR and civilian Muslim population. Give a clear order to your subordinates that they are to refrain from destroying civilian targets unless forced to do so by the strong resistance from the enemy. Issue a prohibition of the torching of housing buildings, and make sure that the civilian population and prisoners of war are treated in compliance with the Geneva Conventions of 12 August 1949, unquote. In other words, the evidence that has been presented here shows that Tolimir cannot be attributed the intent necessary for an attack on the civilian population. Tolimir did not order or issue any orders in the course of combat, nor was he present in Srebrenica. A commander of an operation will involve all the forces, assets, and the rest in the operation under his command. And in the course of that operation, in order to ensure that there is unity of command and singleness of command, all those involved in the operation are subordinated to the commander concerned. The position of the Amprofor was a threat to the VRS from the very start, and they threatened with airstrikes against VRS positions around the enclave. The interpreter asks the accused to start again from that sentence.
Mr.
Tolimir, the interpreters asked to start again with that sentence because they didn't get everything.
Hvala.
Thank you. The blocking positions and the Green Order were, according to the evidence adduced in this case, and as indicated by the prosecution in paragraph 289 of the trial brief, erected on the evening of the 9th of July 1995. However, the VRS main staff did not issue a single order to open fire on Amprofor. Quite the contrary. The VRS main staff issued orders not to open fire on Amprofor and the civilian population. This is indicated, among others, by Exhibit D69, a memo which was designated as urgent and sent by Milenko Živanović from the Pribicevac forward command post personally to General Krstic and the VRS main staff, personally to Zdravko Tolimir. And it was a memo intended for their information, which reads, and I quote, "The main staff has ordered that you do not open fire on Amprofor and that you avert any possible surprise attacks and intentions on the part of the Muslims to tie or to link up Srebrenica and Žepa. I wish you plenty of luck and extend greetings, General Tolimir." Evidence was adduced in this case about the so-called blocking positions erected by the Dutch bat on the 9th July 1995. At paragraph 292 of that final trial brief, the prosecution stated, and I quote, "The idea advanced by the defense that the blocking positions were conceived with the objective of provoking the VRS into opening fire against members of the peace forces makes no sense in view of the fact that the members of the peace forces and the civilian population had been under fire for days and that nothing needed to be done to provoke the VRS into opening fire," unquote. As demonstrated by Exhibit D69, the VRS main staff ordered that no fire should be opened on Amprofor. Whereas the view that blocking positions were conceived with the objective of provoking the VRS into opening fire on Amprofor positions in order to ensure fire support was not in fact an idea advanced by the defense. It is a fact based on the evidence adduced in this case. The allegations advanced by the prosecution are contrary to what the prosecution witness stated, namely General Nicolai, and what Banduin said before the commission of the Dutch Parliament. General Nicolai, in a statement given to the prosecution, which is Exhibit D70, stated the following at page 10, and I quote, on Sunday the 9th, the VRS resumed their attack, and it became quite clear that they were not only attacking the southern part of the enclave, but that their attack had the objective of the town of Srebrenica. This led to several exchanges of consultations between the staff in Sarajevo and the staff in Zagreb. And the main issue discussed in these exchanges was under which conditions would the use of fire power be, of air fire be allowed. Zagreb clearly stated that General Janvier was not willing to resort to this ultimate measure before the Dutch bat used their own weapons. He wanted certain other steps to be taken before airstrikes would be resorted to. As a result of these consultations, we gave an order to the Dutch bat to take up blocking positions south of the town of Srebrenica, so that should the VRS attack the town, it would not only constitute an attack on the civilian population, but also an attack on Amprofor units. Thereby, all the necessary conditions for the use of airstrikes would be met. The Dutch battalion complied with this order, unquote. Consequently, the reason why blocking positions were erected was, without any doubt, to create conditions to ensure that the VRS positions can be bombed. That a green order had been issued is shown by a number of exhibits in this case. Witness Franken stated at transcript page 3453 in lines 23 to 25, and I quote, by having issued a green order, we were engaging with the VRS, and the VRS became a target. And in fact, quite what was realistic and correct was quite the contrary. And at page 3484, he explained that the fact that the green order was issued changed the mandate of the Dutch battalion, and that the restrictions that had been there on the use of armed force disappeared, in fact. Exhibit D324 is the statement given by Van Dijn to the Dutch Parliamentary Commission in investigating Srebrenica. And at page 4, he speaks about this green order and the nature of the order. And I quote, the order was issued as green, which means that there was a higher tendency toward hostilities. We had been preparing for that order, by trying to collect as much equipment as we had at our disposal, and by deploying our soldiers. We next went and took up positions. The order was that we should return fire if fired upon, and that we should first fire above their heads, and I mean of the Serbs, and later right at them. This was part of the combat order by Captain Bruin. In fact, it was a green order which made use of certain blue assets. And this isn't the proper way of going about it. If you are complying with a green order, you have to resort to camouflage and make sure that you carry out your operation with an element of surprise. You can surely not go about it by taking up positions out in the open, without any cover, with white vehicles and blue helmets, unquote. On that same page, there is something to be learned from the question put by a member of the Parliamentary Commission. He made a statement to Van Duyn and put a question to him. Quote, a month earlier, the Dutch battalion was engaged in drills in these blocking positions. Did you participate in these drills yourself? Van Duyn's answer was that he had not taken part in these drills. In other words, the Dutch bat was ready to take up blocking positions at a time when the attack on the enclave had not even been in the planning stage. Had the purpose of these blocking positions been, or rather, that the purpose of these blocking positions was to attract VRS fire, is also proved by the following quotation at page 5. Mr. Baker's question. You took up these positions in a favorable moment. You've already told us that it was supposed to be carried out with fire support. Was the purpose of these blocking positions also to attract the fire of the Bosnian Serbs as a way of bringing about fire support? Van Duyn's answer to that was, I quote, I realized at a later stage that this is what it was all about, unquote.
In response to yet another question on page 6, Van Duyn answered, at first we indeed fired above their heads. I don't recall exactly what was our order. That was just one of the orders of the many issued by Captain Groen. But I know that I issued my artilleryman an order to shoot at the Serbian soldiers as soon as he saw them, unquote. Actions by the Dutch battalion on the ground were such that on the one hand, together with the BiH army, they participated in combat activities against the Serbs, and they did everything that they could in order to shell the VRS positions. On the other hand, they sought protection from the VRS. In this case, no evidence was adduced to the fact that the members of the Dutch battalion who feared Muslims and joined the VRS side, and that in doing that they were exposed to any irregular treatment. In order to prove Tolimir's role in Operation Krivaya, the prosecutor alleges that
Tolimir participated in the coordination and control of Kriva 95 attack and providing support to that attack. That's in paragraph 891. The allegation provided by the prosecutor can be found within the context of the charges contained in paragraph 60 of the third amended indictment, wherein it is stated that Tolimir contributed to the joint criminal enterprise by disabling UNPROFOR's military capabilities, including the prevention and control of the international protection for the enclaves from the outside, including airstrikes and international monitors, unquote. And it says, quote, by his contact with UNPROFOR, he helped to disable UN capabilities during the attack against Srebrenica. To be more specific, he lied to the UNPROFOR and coordinated with other officers from the main staff and in the subordinated units. This prosecutor's allegation is unfounded from several aspects, and one of them is the fact that it is legally unfounded, since those contacts were those that Tolimir maintained as part of his regular duties. First of all, the prosecution claims in paragraph 270 of its final brief that Tolimir was in the main staff of the VRS and in the command of the Drina Corps in Vlasenica. The prosecution's allegation that on the 9th of July Tolimir was in Vlasenica is not corroborated by any evidence. The prosecutor evokes D85, in which it conveys the contents of a conversation with General Nikolai. First of all, Nikolai called the main staff and not the command of the Drina Corps. The command of UNPROFOR did not have a link with the Drina Corps in Vlasenica. Evidence D85 is a document issued by the command of the Drina Corps on the 9th of July 1995, which was sent to the command of the Drina Corps at the forward command post at Pribicevac, to the attention of General Krstić, as well as to the Sector for Intelligence and Security of the main staff, to the attention of General Tolimir for his information. It turns out that Tolimir sent a document to himself in order to inform himself about its contents. It really doesn't make any sense. The only reasonable conclusion that one can draw from an analysis of this document is that Tolimir sent a similar document or a document with the same contents from the General Staff, and somebody in the Drina Corps, probably General Zhivanovic, forwarded it by having first changed the heading. Since this telegram was sent as urgent, it seems that the sender did not have the time or indeed the need to add to it who the telegram was sent by or anything else for that matter. It is important to mention that in this document it is particularly stated, and I quote, "Pay special attention to the protection of UNPROFOR members and the civilian population," unquote. In other words, Tolimir was in the main staff of the VRS. He conveyed his communication with the UNPROFOR, and he insisted on his men protecting UNPROFOR members and the civilian population, despite the fact that they threatened him with airstrikes that had already been planned. This is also demonstrated by evidence D137. That document shows that a death zone had to be created around Srebrenica, and that's a quote, and that death zone had to be created by NATO aircraft. Tolimir did not lie to the Unprofor when he alerted them to the fact that the Muslims were using Unprofor APCs. Let's remind ourselves of Franken's testimony on page 3456 of the transcript. To the question as to whether he knew anything about the fact that checks were made after the General Staff of the VRS had warned them that the Muslims were using 6 combat vehicles that were painted white, he answered, and I quote what Franken said: "I know that sometime in April I received a report from one of my observation posts. They reported to me that 2 APCs 60 8-wheelers painted in white arrived from south, and that they drove into the enclave at a very high speed. We tried to stop them, however, or to confirm that they were there. However, after that we never saw them again. During the attack, we did not see them being used," unquote. On page 3459, lines 16 through 19, Franken testified that in the logistics report he saw that members of the Ukrainian battalion in Jepa reported a loss of 6 APCs. Exhibit P1225 proves that those APCs were indeed used. That is an order for the attack against Jepa issued on the 13th July 1995. In paragraph 7 of this document on page 3, it is stated, I quote, "Be prepared for action against APCs, which the Muslim army had stolen from Unprofor, and it is now using them against our own forces," unquote. The prosecutor alleges in paragraph 893 of the final brief that during the operation, Tolimir lied to Unprofor in order to try to buy time, that he manipulated them in order to make it easier to the VRS to occupy the enclave and to forcibly remove the population, unquote. The prosecutor alleges that Tolimir's actions neutralized in the key final phase of the Srebrenica operation the Unprofor troops, so that Unprofor did not succeed in blocking the VRS attack and thus saving the enclave, unquote. General Nicola and General Janvier, with whom Tolimir communicated on the telephone, did not make their decisions based on what Tolimir had told them. Rather, they made their decisions based on their own intelligence, the intelligence that they received from the Dutch battalion, and in keeping with what they had intended to achieve. During that period of time, Tolimir performed his regular duties, and he responded to Unprofor requests. In the course of the operation, during which UNPROFOR from day one sided up with the BIH army, which had been previously planned at a meeting between Karemans and representatives of the BIH army. With them, he coordinated his own activities and he used all of the available force against the VRS on the 9th, 10th, and 11th July. And that also included airstrikes on the 11th July 1995. The objective of the attack against the enclave, as we have already demonstrated, was not to attack the civilian population or the UNPROFOR, which is clear from several documents that Tolimir sent during the relevant period. The attack against the enclave was aimed at its demilitarization, at attacking and fighting against armed terrorist groups. And those were legitimate objectives and those were legitimate targets. The prosecution does not have a single piece of evidence based on which it could prove that Tolimir's participation in that operation was against the civilian population. The contrary is true. He regularly issued instructions not to attack the civilian population and not to attack UNPROFOR. Tolimir's participation in the attack against Srebrenica cannot be qualified as an attack against the civilian population. His actions and negotiations with UNPROFOR, during which he reported to the UNPROFOR on what he had received from the ground, he's taking measures in order to remove the bodies are not actions that would incriminate him. In paragraph 60b of the indictment, the prosecution charges Tolimir with the participation in the military arming of the Muslim forces. Could the accused please slow down?
Again, you are asked by the interpreters to slow down. You should repeat the last sentence, beginning with the words in paragraph 60b of the indictment.
In paragraph 60b of the indictment, the prosecution charges Tolimir with the participation in the military defeat of the Muslim forces. Allegedly, he did that by, and I quote, he contacted the forward command post of the Drina Corps and the president of Republika Srpska, Radovan Karadzic, with regard to the combat operations surrounding Srebrenica and the decision on taking Srebrenica. This charge is unfounded, i.e., it cannot be considered any sort of contribution to the alleged forcible removal of the population of Srebrenica, namely Exhibit D41, which is Tolimir's document issued on the 9th of July 1995, is clear with regard to the fact that the target of the attack was neither the civilian Muslim population nor the UNPROFOR. In this document, it is stated, and I quote, I order you not to set residential buildings on fire, and I order you to treat the civilian population in agreement with the Geneva Conventions dated the 12th of August 1949, unquote. The text of this instruction is clear. The prosecutor considers the evacuation of the Srebrenica population unlawful, i.e. the prosecutor claims that that was the case of a forcible removal of the population. The decision on the evacuation of the civilian population is not Tolimir's decision. It was not a decision by the main staff of the Army of Republika Srpska or the civilian bodies of Republika Srpska. That decision was taken at the level of the United Nations and by the authorities in Srebrenica. What was the position of Republika Srpska towards the civilian population of Srebrenica? This can be seen from Exhibit D41, which is Tolimir's document, which says that the civilian population had to be treated in keeping with the Geneva Conventions, as well as Exhibit P23, i.e. The decision on the appointment of the civilian commissioner for the municipality of Srebrenica, dated 11 July 1995. In this decision, in its paragraph 4, it is stated, and I quote, the commissioner will make sure that the civilian and military bodies, when it comes to all the citizens who participated in fighting the VRS, should be treated as prisoners of war. At the same time, they will make sure that the civilian population can freely choose the place where they want to move to. Who is it who planned the evacuation of the population of Srebrenica? This can be seen in Exhibit D174, a document which was issued on the 11th of July 1995. This is a telegram which Anand sent to Akashi and presents the UN policy towards the Srebrenica enclave. It consists of a complete evacuation of Srebrenica. In paragraph 2b of this document, it is stated inter alia, I quote, UNHCR reports that 80% to 90% of the population of Srebrenica, in brackets, the total number of the population is about 40,000 people, are made up of the displaced persons who had fled war activities at the beginning of the war, so that they don't have any property in Srebrenica and they will not be attached to the enclave, and they will be interested in leaving for Tuzla. One of the local UNHCR members in Srebrenica stated today that practically all the people there wanted to leave the enclaves, unquote. Somewhat later, it is stated, and I quote, after the consultations with the Bosnian government, in order to avoid the continuation of the humanitarian disaster, the Bosnian Serbs will be requested to allow all the population, including all the men, to leave Srebrenica and to go to Tuzla if they so wish. The Dutch battalion will be instructed to remain in Srebrenica until the moment the departure of those people is agreed with the Bosnian Serbs. Under the ideal circumstances, a considerable number of armed UNPROFOR members will stay in UNPROFOR at least until the moment everybody who wants to leave the enclave is gone. This operation will have to be coordinated with the desire of the Dutch battalion to evacuate its own forces from Srebrenica as soon as possible.
In paragraph 3 of this document, it is said, UNPROFOR, and I quote, UNPROFOR shall immediately commence negotiations with the Bosnian Serbs about 1. The supply of the necessary foodstuffs and medical supplies for the population of Srebrenica, and number 2, about safe, speedy, and organized departure of all these people from Srebrenica to Tuzla, including able-bodied men, starting with an urgent evacuation of the wounded. This is going to be a major logistical operation that could start as early as on the 13th of July. This policy of the UNPROFOR was implemented by members of the Dutch battalion, namely at the first meeting at the Fontana Hotel. Karamans told Mladic that UNPROFOR wished people to be pulled out, i.e. that they were waiting for buses to arrive.
Srpskom, a 19:20, 1:26, 27 na engleskom.
We don't receive English translation at the moment.
The interpreters apologize. We cannot follow all the references.
Mr. Tolimir, the last part of the sentence which is recorded is that they were waiting for buses to arrive. From there on, you should continue. Could you please repeat the number of the document you are referring to so that it can be brought up on the screen?
This policy of UNPROFOR was implemented by members of the Dutch battalion, namely Karamans, at the first meeting.
Mr. Tolimir, I asked you to give the reference again, the number of the documents, so it can be brought up on the screen, which would assist the interpreters.
Predmet
P1008, pages 16 and 17 in Serbian, and 19 to 21, and 26 and 27 in English.
I na strani 20.
And on page 20 of the transcript from this meeting, it is said, and I quote, "What I was requested by General Nicolai, and something that was ordered to him by General Janvier in Sarajevo, as well as by the authorities, to stop what had been going on in the last 6 days on behalf of the population and for the benefit of the population. All of us would like to maintain the status quo and then to the enclave to be abandoned." In other words, these are the statements made by Colonel Karamans. Therefore, one cannot attribute the forcible relocation of the population to the VRS, having in mind that this operation was carried out at the request of UNPROFOR and the civilian population of the enclave, and at the same time, the Dutch battalion asked them to abandon and leave the enclave as soon as possible. General Mladic did not want to agree to that before he heard from representatives of the civilian population, and he asked for 2 meetings with them. Tolimir was not in Srebrenica either on the 12th or the 13th of July or before or after these dates. However, In paragraph 354, the prosecution says, and I quote, that officers for intelligence at all levels within the VRS, from the main staff downwards, were under Tolimir's command, and they supervised, coordinated, and carried out the operation of forcible relocation, unquote. This argument is totally unfounded and speculative. First of all, none of the officers or soldiers of the VRS or members of the MUP was under Tolimir's command. Tolimir could not issue any orders to them. During combat operations, all individuals had to operate and follow the orders of the commander of the operation and not Tolimir's proposals. The officers who were present in Potocari and Srebrenica were directly under the command of the operation commander. They couldn't and they didn't receive orders from Tolimir. At the time, Jankovic was resubordinated to the command of the Drina Corps, and he served as a liaison officer for UNPROFOR. The prosecution witness, Colonel Salapura, said in this trial on 3rd May 2011, transcript page 13578, that sometime between 11th and 19th, Radoslav Jankovic was subordinated to the command of the Drina Corps. In other words, everything he did pursuant to the orders, under the direction and control of the Drina Corps and not of Tolimir. The prosecution corroborates their argument that Tolimir controlled Jankovic by citing Exhibit P626. First of all, there is no information contained in this document testifying to the fact that Tolimir had any knowledge about any criminal offense committed during the evacuation. On the contrary, in his report, Jankovic wrote the following inter alia: "We believe that we wish to take control of the enclaves Žepa and Gorazda, and in order to do that, it is necessary to portray the action in Srebrenica in the media in such a way that we are depicted as providing fair treatment to the population and even to the combatants who laid down their weapons." One can only draw one reasonable conclusion from this. Jankovic has no information about any killing plans. If there was a plan to kill the able-bodied men, how was it then possible to portray it in the media as receiving good treatment? In paragraph 894, the prosecution asserts that Tolimir supervised, directed, and guided his subordinates, including Jankovic, Popovic, Momir Nikolic, and as well as the military police of the Bratunac Brigade and the Drina Corps, while they were directing forcible relocation of the population from Potocari on the 12th and 13th of July, and that he was fully aware of the illegality of their actions. This claim of the prosecution is completely unfounded. First of all, where was Tolimir on the 12th and 13th July? Was Tolimir present at the meetings in the Fontana Hotel, or did he participate in any other operation relating to Srebrenica? Tolimir informed the commander of the operation and the security organs about everything he knew about the enemy activities in accordance with the rules of war, which is something that is going to be discussed later on in the rebuttal to the accusation about the alleged joint criminal enterprise of killing able-bodied men of Srebrenica. None of the VRS officers who were present in Srebrenica was under Tolimir's command. Tolimir did not supervise their work. And he couldn't do that because that was the responsibility of their respective commanders and the operation commander who took part. Since Tolimir was not in Srebrenica on the 12th or 13th July, and since he did not take part in the evacuation of the Srebrenica population, as requested by the UN officials, Tolimir cannot be considered responsible for the alleged forcible relocation of the population, nor for opportunistic killings cited by the prosecution in the indictment. The prosecution has come forward with a series of unfounded accusations against Tolimir with regard to the events in the area of Žepa in July 1995. In paragraph 60D of the indictment, the prosecution says, and I quote, that Tolimir took part in the negotiations with representatives of Muslims of Žepa and offered them a choice between evacuation or military action by the VRS. This assertion is completely erroneous. In paragraph 895 of their final brief, the prosecution alleges that Tolimir gave, quote-unquote, illegal ultimatum by saying, quote, that the population had to leave the enclave or face a military action, end of quote. The prosecution qualifies this as a criminal act of forcible relocation. The meeting that the prosecution qualified in the above described way was documented in a number of exhibits. First of all, P491 is Tolimir's report dated the 13th of July from the said meeting. It says in the first sentence, and I quote, on the 13th of July 1995, at 1200 hours, we had a contact with Hamdia Torlak, the president of the Žepa Executive Committee, and Mujo Omanovic, a member of the war presidency, about the demilitarization of the enclave and the freedom of movement of the civilian population pursuant to the Geneva Conventions of 12 August 1995. This document does not contain a single reference to any forcible act of forcing the civilian population to leave the enclave. The commander of the Ukrainian battalion in Zhepa was also present at the meeting. This is Prosecution Exhibit P 596, which is a memorandum dated 13th July 1995, drafted by Louis Fortin. In paragraph 8, it is said, and I quote, "The commander of the Rogatitsa Brigade, accompanied by General Tolimir and local representatives, held a meeting at the Ukrainian Command Post 2 today at 1200 hours. The Serbs asked the Zhepa Bosnians to lay down their weapons, after which the civilian population can either go or stay." End of quote. And the last sentence of paragraph 9 reads, I quote, "The Serbs want to take hold of this pocket without fighting if possible." In other words, the ultimatum had nothing to do with a forcible relocation of the civilian population. It has been proven in this trial that there were many civilians in Zhepa who wanted to leave the enclave. For example, the majority of the population was constituted by refugees who wanted to leave the enclave because other members of their families were either accommodated in other areas or they wanted to leave to third countries. Tolimir reports about these negotiations, which is Exhibit P491. And it reads, I quote, "We have provided guarantees for the evacuation of the entire civilian population and able-bodied men who surrender their weapons, as well as security and safety for the civilian population who decide to acknowledge the authority of the Republika Srpska and to remain in its territory." End of quote. Therefore, this is not about expelling population, but rather allowing the able-bodied men who surrender their weapons, that is to say members of the army of Bosnia and Herzegovina who wants to leave, to be allowed to leave. Therefore, it is clearly stated that safety will be guaranteed to those who decide to stay behind. This kind of conduct is in compliance with the agreement on demilitarization of Srebrenica and Zhepa from 1993, which was confirmed by an agreement on general cessation of hostilities of 31st December 1994. According to document P145, in which Tolimir reports that the planned contacts were not made, he indicates that the Muslims want, and I quote, "secure the support of the majority of the population for the already made decision to move out. They informed most of the inhabitants and soldiers that everybody will be allowed either to leave or to stay in the area of Zhepa, provided they surrender their weapons and recognize the Serbian authority." End of quote. A number of well-off Muslims showed interest to move out with their movable property and to move to the FRY or to through third countries, thereby wishing to avoid being engaged in the army of Bosnia and Herzegovina. With the mediation of UNPROFOR, we informed the Zhepa leadership that the process of moving out and the surrender of weapons must commence at 900 hours on the 15th of July 1995. If they decide not to move out under the offered conditions, we are planning to start combat operations.
Therefore, this has nothing to do with the expulsion of the population. It has to do with the demilitarization of the enclave. It has to do with the evacuation of those who are supposed to lay down their weapons, and not about the forcible removal of the civilian population. That's why the accusation contained in paragraph 60 of the third amended indictment is completely without foundation. The objective of the attack on Žepa was not the civilian population, as in fact indicated in Exhibit P1225. It is a document by General Krstić dated the 13th of July 1995, titled Order to Attack the Enclave of Žepa. In item 9 of the order, you can read the following, and I quote: "The civilian Muslim population and UNPROFOR are not the targets of our forces. They are to be rounded up and kept secure under guard, and the armed Muslim groups are to be crushed and destroyed," unquote. The orders of this and similar sort are not issued for the sake of formality, but to be complied with. As was the case with Srebrenica, the area of Žepa was also passed off as a demilitarized zone, and the Muslims routinely cited and exploited as far as they could this abominable lie. As stated by Viktor Bezruchenko in the report entitled The Fall of Žepa, which is Exhibit D55, at paragraph 65, and I quote: "The BH Army expected Žepa to attract the attention of the international media, and the Moral Guidance Administration of the BH Army General Staff had been developing instructions for a psychological operation related to Žepa. It was the strategy of the BH Army to deny the presence of any BH Army units in Žepa, Srebrenica or Goražde, to attribute any military operations to the unarmed population, and not to admit to any or not to accept any discussions on evacuation." The transcript does not state that this was D55, paragraph 65. And let me continue. What was truly going on is indicated in a number of documents that were admitted into evidence in this case, and I will cite only several of them. On the 14th of July 1995, the War Presidency of Žepa issued a decision to call general mobilization. This is Exhibit D349. Under this decision, all the available resources and personnel were placed in the service of the army. General Petar Škrbić, in answer to a question put by Judge Mindua, stated as follows, and I quote: "This clearly states that all those who are able-bodied should be placed at the disposal of the brigade and will become members of the brigade without any additional conditions. They are to be issued with weapons, their work obligation is to be discontinued, and they are to become full-fledged members of the brigade, unquote. The document is also significant because the way in which general mobilization was called in JEPA, and since this applied to able-bodied members of the army, in the case of their capture, they would be entitled to the status of prisoners of war. Alija Izetbegović, the president of the BH Federation, spoke about the evacuation of JEPA with General Smith. Thus, in document D363, a letter sent by Alija Izetbegović to General Delić, it is stated, and I quote, "I have just finished my talks with General Smith. Perhaps I should secure the evacuation of JEPA, and I mean women and elderly from JEPA with the mediation of UNPROFOR, unquote." And item 4 reads, and I quote, "This contains a plan of the evacuation of the population of JEPA, which is to be applied in the event that neither the contents of items 1 or 2 are to be feasible. And I am sending you annexed the plan of the evacuation of the population of JEPA. This plan states that it was developed on the basis of the message that was sent out by the people of JEPA on the 16th of July 1995 and the information provided by the commander of the OS JEPA of the 17th of July. And that it was on the basis of these documents that talks were held with Alija Izetbegović on the 17th and 18th July 1995. Now, the proposal that this document contains in item 2 is as follows. And it's on the following page, and I quote, that the entire population of JEPA should be evacuated in an organized fashion in evacuation groups and as soon as may be, if possible, forthwith, or rather based on assessments of the situation on the ground in order to ensure their safe transport. The BH army ought to secure the column of the population which is to be evacuated. Those members of the population who are not able to be evacuated on foot for reasons of health or other reasons ought to be put up in the UNPROFOR base in JEPA. And once a list of them has been drawn up, are to be evacuated with the assistance of the International Red Cross, UNHCR, and other international institutions, and transferred to the Free Territory. These individuals are to be accommodated in the UNPROFOR base in JEPA right away. And they should follow the last unit leaving the territory of JEPA in order to ensure the secrecy of the entire evacuation plan.
That was the end of the citation of the entire evacuation plan. Mr. Tolimir, it's now time for the second break. I have no idea how much time you will need to conclude your closing arguments. You have 1 hour left, 3/4 of an hour today and 1/4 of an hour tomorrow. I would like to invite you especially to address the core issues of this case in the remaining hour. As you know, since February of this year, like the prosecution, you have 1 day for presenting your final submissions, your oral final closing arguments. Will you be able to finalize it within 1 hour? This is one question I have for you, and I have one question for Mr. McCloskey, and then we may know how to proceed. Are you able to indicate already now if you will need time for rebuttal?
Yes, and good afternoon, everyone, Mr. President, Your Honor. Yes, we would like some time for rebuttal. I doubt very much it will take all of the 30 minutes, but we have identified some issues.
In any case, that makes clear that we will have a hearing tomorrow, sitting tomorrow, with the completion of Mr. Tolimir's submissions, with rebuttal by the prosecution and a possible rejoinder by Mr. Tolimir. We have our second break now, and first of all, Mr. Tolimir, will you be able to conclude your oral submissions in the remaining hour?
Hvala, gospodine predsjedavajući.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 24 pages left. My legal advisor and I will try to cut it down unless we are going to be able to present it all.
In preparing for your oral submissions, you should have thought about the length of the presentation, the speed of everything you will present. And I think you know that from February of this year, and you were reminded yesterday at the outset of our hearing that you, as the prosecution, will have 1 day, no more. Mr. Gajic, I see you on your feet.
Mr. President, my apologies, a small intervention. As we were preparing the closing arguments, if you look at the word count, it roughly corresponds to the word count of the prosecution's closing arguments, and I was guided by that as I was working with Mr. Tolimir on our submissions. Our closing arguments even fall somewhat short of that, that's to say 1 day's oral submissions by the prosecution. And I think we are more or less on the track, and if we end up short of some 15 to 20 minutes, we will kindly ask for your leave to proceed till the end.
I will repeat that it is necessary to prepare an oral submission on a reasonable length. You, Mr. Tolimir, you have indicated that you, together with your legal assistant, will try to make it short so that we can finish in the time given. We adjourn and resume 6:15.
All rise, vi vil det være.